Today we're starting with the foundation of SQL, the select and from statements. These two commands are the backbone of almost every query you will ever write. If you understand them clearly, everything else you learn in SQL will make a lot more sense. Let's begin with the concept. The select statement tells the database what columns you want to see in the output. You don't always want the full table. Sometimes you only need one or two specific pieces of information, and select lets you control that. The from statement tells the database which table the information should come from. Think of it like this. Select is what you want, and from is where you want it from. Together, select and from form the simplest possible query. Why does this matter? Imagine you're working in a company database with hundreds of columns and millions of rows. Pulling everything at once would be overwhelming, slow, and often completely unnecessary. By using select and from, you can target exactly the fields you need, making your queries faster and your results cleaner. Now let's talk about use cases. You'll use select and from anytime you want to pull specific columns from a table. For example, if you only want customer names, you don't need addresses, phone numbers, or anything else. Select lets you focus on just the names. This is also the very first step in almost every SQL query. Filtering rows, grouping values, joining multiple tables, all of these operations begin with a select and a from. They are truly the foundation of SQL. There are also some practical tips. When working with AI tools, you'll want to be very explicit about what table and what columns you need. If you just say, "Get me customer data," the AI might guess wrong. Instead, say, "Select the first name and last name from the customers table." That kind of clarity avoids errors. And even if an AI generates your query, you should always validate it before running it, especially when working with large or important datasets. Now let's look at the syntax. A basic query looks like this. You type select, then list the column names, and finally write from with the table name. The order matters. Select always comes before from. If you switch them, the query won't run. All right, let's switch over to BigQuery and see this in action. Here's our first example. We're selecting just the first name and the last name columns. The result will only show those two columns. This is the cleanest way to narrow down what you need. In our second example, instead of picking columns one by one, we select everything using the star symbol. That means we're pulling all columns in the table. This is quick and sometimes useful for exploration. But it's not a best practice when building production queries. It's better to be intentional about what you want. Next, let's look at distinct. If we ask for the country column, normally we might see the same country repeated many times across different rows. By adding distinct, the database removes those duplicates and gives us only the unique list of countries. This is really handy for finding categories, regions, or any field where you only want the distinct values. Another important feature is limit. If we write a query to select 3 or 4 columns, we can add limit 10 at the end. This tells the database to only return 10 rows. Limit is useful for testing or previewing data without loading the entire dataset. It saves time and keeps your results manageable. Finally, let's talk about renaming columns, also known as using aliases. By adding the keyword AS, we can give a column a new name in the results. For example, instead of showing first name, we could display it simply as F name. Aliases are especially useful when you're combining multiple tables and need to avoid confusion, or when you want the results to look cleaner for a report. And that covers the basics of select and from. We've seen how to choose specific columns, how to select all columns, how to remove duplicates, how to limit rows, and how to rename output. These 5 techniques alone already cover a huge percentage of the queries you'll write in real life. The important thing to remember is that every complex SQL command builds on this foundation. Filtering, grouping, joining tables, subqueries, window functions, they all start with select and from. Master this pattern, and you'll be ready for everything else that comes next.